Morning everyone. Okay, let's just check that all the stream is working well. And if you can all hear me, to let me know. It would be really cool to switch back so you can all see. If someone could just confirm that you can hear my voice clearly, that would be awesome. So that I don't end up talking for 20 minutes and nobody hears anything I say. It's been a while since I've done a stream. I think I missed August. And it's about 6 a.m. in the morning here, so I'm a bit sleepy. I thought, I'll set my alarm for about 5:30 and I'll wake up. So I wake up thinking, it must be about 5:30, my body clock's pretty good. Oh, it's 4:30. Oh. Okay, so it's not going to be such a great morning. Excellent. So to start with, thanks everyone for joining me for the live stream, and thanks everyone for being a supporter in the last, and sometimes now getting on to well over a couple of years now. It's made a huge difference to my being able to make videos and review stuff in general. It made it possible to continue, otherwise I would have had to stop. So thanks again to everyone who's been a supporter. And for people who are new to watching me, who don't already know, my videos are primarily supported by people who pay, say, a couple of bucks a month, and they, in exchange, get my free advice anytime and go in the draw to win free stuff and see the videos in advance. I can see if I can remember all this stuff. And we have a private community where we just, chat and talk about gear and that kind of thing. So to start with this morning, for my supporters, I have a number of questions, and I'll get through those first. And so, excuse me if I ignore the chat. The chat's behind me. I can't get the chat to show up on my iPad here, so I don't know. I should probably get it to show up on a computer, but in front of me. But anyway, I'll just have to glance over the screen repeatedly. So I've got to see if I can read this name. Dystacia asks, I would like to know more about tube amplifier maintenance and care. I have a Lear 3 sent for repairs multiple times now, and I don't yet exactly know don't know what's happening. Last time they said they had to repair the high voltage tube rails. This is my first tube amplifier, and I'd like to know general tips for maintaining my tube amplifier and tubes in good condition, such as on-time duration, off-time duration, cleaning, ambient temperature, moisture, etc. Things that are damaging to tubes and should be avoided. And should I have surge protection and maybe a UPS behind my tube amplifiers? Does it help trying to save the life of it? And what about impact of sound and protection devices? So, now there's a lot to get into. Usually, the main thing about tubes is that they don't last forever. They last about 10,000 hours. And then you start, depending on the tube, to start getting issues like maybe a channel starts dropping out, or the sound starts becoming a bit weak or strange or something like that. The main thing, the Lear 3 had an issue where it was the particular tube sockets, and some tubes, it was easy to insert the tubes the wrong way. I mean, you could insert them, but you'd have to use a little bit more force because it is say for example, this one that they include, an aftermarket 6SN7, the little notch, the guiding notch to show which way around it should be put in, is only kind of small. Some tubes it's got a fairly large notch, and this tongue sole reissue has a fairly small notch. So it was easy, like with the center hole was a little bit too large. It was easy to slide it in, and I actually ended up doing this once by accident and actually broke off the centerpiece. It's actually glued in place on this one. I had to glue it back, and when it broke off in a very odd pattern, so thankfully I could put it back. But that's the main thing, is to be very careful about putting the tube in correctly. There shouldn't be, I suppose, the rule is you don't overhandle them, like, putting lots of fingerprints on them. I suppose you could even, like, just, while the tube's cold, wipe off the fingerprints and stuff like that with a dry cloth. Moisture, of course, with any electronics should be avoided entirely. But yeah, if something's repeatedly dying, that's kind of odd. I would say that if you have, I've noticed two issues with people who have repeated problems with electronics. One is that they're cursed. I knew a guy who just about everything he touched just stopped working. I had friends who would tell stories about this. About I don't remember which famous guy it was. Was it Edison or was it another guy? Who every time he walked into his lab, something broke. And it's just a weird electronic curse. And I've had customers like this too. Everything they touched, no matter how reliable it was from the factory, just broke. The second is power issues in the house. When I used to service Apple computers, I did software service rather than hardware service back when it was kind of more necessary in around 1999. Yeah, that sounds about right. I remember that we'd have a customer come in. They said, their computer's not working, and we plug it in, test it, worked perfectly. And it turned out there was a power issue in their house or maybe their office. And another one we worked out was the second round of colored iMacs, when there was an issue where they were sensitive to power fluctuations or something like that. I'd guessed that before it actually became a firmware upgrade for them. So it turned out that's the other thing. I think the more than a UPS, it's interesting having a PS Audio Power Plant Premier here, and I was lucky to pick one up cheap. Is that the amount of distortion on the incoming signal is actually considerably higher than you might imagine. It's obviously the AC wave is not very clean, and I guess some gear is sensitive to it, or you may be having some kind of power surge protection might well be an idea. And who knows what's going on in the house. I was just the other day, I was sitting up here listening and hear this bzzz, and every minute for about 10 seconds this buzz would go on. I was like, what? And I traced it down to a transformer I had where is actually a transformer which I'd unscrewed and put on, rather than the cheap cable that was attached to it, put on a bit of wire. But it had a screw, and then it had one nut holding the transformer in, and then a second nut holding the back plate on. And the inner screws I hadn't tightened properly because I'd unscrewed it thinking that would make it easy to get the nut off the back plate, but it had also unscrewed the inner screw and inner nuts, which kind of, and some component, something in my house when it was around dinner time, and my wife was cooking, and I don't know what was going on, but someone, maybe it could have been a washing machine. I don't know if it could have been a washing machine. Some piece of electronics in my house was sending, even through the power plant Premiere, there's some surge going on, and the power plant Premiere's input distortion level jumped for 10 seconds every minute, and it was causing this transformer to vibrate. And even after I tightened that up and unplugged it, even the transformers inside my disc arrays were vibrating too. And it's like, what? So there's weird stuff can go on the power in your house. The reliability can be, I don't know what, it could even begin to know what could be caused. I've had people who had, was it LED lights or something like that? Sometimes if you have a light that's got an issue, it can cause buzzing through your radios and stuff like that. And we had that. We got one of those new low power lights when they were all the rage back in the 90s, I think. And we had a buzzing in the radio all the time, and we eventually had people come round and with meters and everything like that. It turned out to be one of these lights. The electronics in it were causing buzzing. So I don't know if your amplifier is going back. If you have gear that's repeatedly breaking, I would be checking my power supply to my house or whatever it is to see if something is an issue. So ranting on about power. But the cheap way around that, some people get trip light isolation transformers is one supposedly cheap and effective way of improving the power supply to your gear. But yeah, I haven't played with a lot of this stuff. I wouldn't mind doing so, but it's just the weight and effort required to do this, and I don't know anyone with it, so that I could borrow it. But you can actually get trip light transformers here, but they're third party imported, and the price difference between what you actually pay for them in the US and here is just massive. Other than that, usage time for a tube amp is, well, of course, the tubes only last about 10,000 hours, so the more you have them sitting on, the more you're using up the tube life. And the problem with the Studio 6 is it sounds best after it's warmed up. For me, I reckon it sounds best at the end of the day after it's been on for about 8 hours. And that's probably because of the large transformers. There's nothing to do with the tubes, I think. Tubes should heat up within, a couple of minutes. But the transformers in there are huge, so once it warms up at the end of the day, it's really, really nice. But that means I'm wasting tube life having it sit there idle. So yeah, so it's a with something like a Lear 3, it should get to warm. I think it's more like high-end gear, which I consider like, long on time, like these things with big transformers and a lot of electronics. Everything else, try not to knock stuff over here. Everything else is I wouldn't if there's smaller stuff like a few minutes to warm up, less than an hour. Bifrost 2, well, it's a tricky one because it has those funny ladder decks in them, but unless you've got really big gear, as I said, like these two things behind me, then the warm-up time shouldn't be, more than an hour at most, I reckon anyway. Okay, next question was from Sherry. How large of an impact would there be if a component of your system, for example a DAC amp or RCA XLR splitter, unusual one, is powered from a household step-up, step-down transformer? Well, that's a good question. How much of a difference? I think it's going to, again, it depends on the power in your house. If you have a really good power supply, then maybe you don't have a lot of stuff interfering with the power like other electronics, then it should be maybe less of a difference. Or if there's a lot of electronics, or maybe you're in I don't know how much apartment buildings affect it. Like if you're in an apartment in the middle of a city, maybe it would make more of a difference, possibly. One thing you can try is, let's say you have your system plugged into, plug your system into a separate power point where nothing else is plugged in. Now, supposedly, here's the thing about power cables and power cable evil discussion here. Apparently, if you have, why would an audiophile power cable, even though it's only like 1.5 meters or 5-6 feet, make a difference when it's only like the last bit of wire? You've got all this household wire and other wire going to the main power supply, from the city or whatever. Why would it make a difference? And apparently, like if you have if it's a well, constructed and shielded cable, apparently high frequency noise only travels it acts as a high frequency noise filter, supposedly, and so that's why. Then I don't know how high frequency noise totally interacts with electronic gear, but having the high frequency noise, the power cable acting as a high frequency noise filter, may or may not improve the sound quality of the system, which is like the first time I tried, a basically decent braided power cable. Was like, this shouldn't make any difference, but it did. That's odd. And apparently that's the reason that they work. So I would say how much of a difference it's going to make depends on. I would experiment with like cheaper options first, and then if you think, oh well, this is making a difference, then maybe get something dedicated, like some kind of dedicated power supply or isolation transformer or something for your whole system, because that's going to be cheaper in the long run. But the basic thing to do is like use a different power point in your house away from other electronics, so that any noise other electronics are generating is less likely to be picked up by a power socket further away, I guess is how it works. Simple stuff, maybe, see, does a basic power cord seem to make a difference? Does an isolation transformer make a difference? And those are the cheaper options, and I think better value options. If you depend, it's relative to what you're using, I suppose. Like, let's say you have a small shit audio system. Well, you wouldn't want to spend money on power supply stuff for that. If you're up to expensive stuff like this, well, this has primarily the difference between this and the smaller audio GD gear is the power supply, and that's they make even regenerative power supply versions of their equipment, which supposedly sound the best, and considerably. Kingware reckons the HE versions are like twice as good as the non-HE versions, apparently. Although I wouldn't want the power bill for them. Here the power's really expensive. and again, they used just oversized transformers in the Studio 6. So apparently, power does make a primary difference, but without, this is one of those things that really needs someone to do a comprehensive kind of survey using. We made these changes to my system. I felt it made this improvement, and then let's measure the differences between the power AC waves or the DC and noise from up to high, inaudible high frequencies and everything, and the environment, noise in the environment. It would be interesting to do if someone actually went to the trouble of doing a comprehensive survey of the the electronic environment and how much power stuff made a difference. But everyone goes, oh, I bought this and it made a difference, but without that's kind of how the situation is at the moment. Sorry for ignoring chat, by the way. I'm just trying to get through the questions. Yethel asks, what are new tubes? How do they differ from regular tubes, and why aren't they more widespread? So new tube is this thing from Korg, which is based on, they basically are using tube technology, but they were used for like it's the tech used for vacuum display tubes. But they're very low power. They'll power off a battery. I mean, you can make a portable amp with them. They're that low power, but they're more or less a single-ended triode. Why aren't they more widespread? I was discussing this with someone. Why didn't they try using new tubes in their amp? And I can't remember exactly what they said. They have their own good and bad points. I mean, if you want, I suppose the main reason is you can't easily replace them. Although I suppose you could make a socket where you can pop them in and out. I guess they just haven't caught on in a big way. Some people, there are DIY kits with them. Some people use them in their amps. They had a nice amp here I did review from Apex, the Apex Sangaku. And I was like looking at that and I thought, oh, that's a really nice amp. And I was trying to get it back from the friend who's currently got it to use it as part of a review. And I just went to the Apex site and it's gone. So their cheaper amps unfortunately have gone. But it was apart from the fact that it if you even touched it and you'd hear it ringing in your ears, the tube wasn't well damped. I don't know why they aren't used, and I suppose there would be a good alternative for amps, especially portable amps. Or now we have, of course, Cayenne's N8, which has one, where instead of using those hearing aid tubes, which are their new old stock, you can use a brand new Korg new tube, although it's a little bit bigger, and probably get the same effect without having to use any more power. And they're readily available. Although I don't know what the shelf life is of them. I have to check. I think I guess it might be longer than a normal tube. So I don't know why they're not more popular. I guess regular tubes, they're still very abundant. There you can buy. There are new versions of the new Electro Harmonics has brand new tubes available. So I think it's just maybe easier to use those than. When people want tubes, they want something that, little pretty glowing tube kind of thing. So easier to use those, I guess. So that's, but there are some, the last manufacturer I asked about it there were some particular electrical considerations which they didn't want to deal with. And that's, I would have to go back and find out what they said. Albert C. asks, I've been playing around with speaker positions in a room lately and noticed that pulling the speakers away from the back wall creates a soundstage. What is contributing to this effect? Is it reflection off the back wall? Yes. There's a site on this which explains it. So, if you have a speaker and a back wall and there's different ratios, you can test this by moving yourself. There's a site, and I have to find the link. So let's say my speakers are backported so that some of the bass energy goes to the back wall and is reflected and bounces off and goes forward. And then from the speaker, you of course have the front cones and front drivers which project sound forward. And the interference of this and the distance you are affects how your perception of how the kind of the sound stage and the amount of bass. And for example, if I play music now where I'm sitting in my desk, I don't hear a great deal of bass, but if I go right up to the speakers, I can hear huge amounts of bass bouncing off the back wall. So it's this kind of relationship of front and back wall, position and the back wall and how it's connected. And I read this and I was experimenting around as well. And I actually, it was interesting. I have a corner with a little window and next to a cupboard, and so it's got a gap that if you can find these gap shelves in Japan, which are like super narrow. And I actually searched around for about an hour searching for the right size of gap shelf, which wasn't too, which would fit in this gap to make a bass trap. And I put some boxes on there. And it's a perfect bass trap, and the bass traps here cost a few $100s, so it was $80 or whatever. But there's a site on it. I wish I had the link handy, but I don't. Someone will probably post it. So, yeah, I'm not a big expert on speakers. I never spent many years without them. So, but a lot of all the information now is all available online. But I suppose you just have to experiment, and there are various ratios which work, and then different speakers have. I have my speakers are LX, which are bottom ported as well, and I chose those deliberately to avoid having to deal with the bass issues. Although there were some, obviously. But it's much easier to not have to deal with it than to kind of have to. You get some speakers which everyone says are great, then they don't suit your room. Albert also asks, what are the best record labels, recording engineers, studios in terms of sound quality from your memory? I haven't looked into this a lot. My two favorites are the two that I know, or three that I know, David Chesky as binaural recordings. The second is some Decca Masters. I don't know if all or some or most. The third, of course, is stuff like Native DSD, where they go out of their way to record stuff to the highest quality possible with minimum mastering. Recording, this is important because I'll eventually, when I get it together, do an MQA video. And the thing is, people they record. Recordings are done in, you have a studio, and like say someone sings. You have a singer, for example, or a band, and then they record that onto a track. Depending on the music, they might the modern pop stuff. You have the singer in a box, in the phone box. You probably can see this online, and then they just they already recorded the music, and they just sing to the music. And they the worst of it, they run it through a processor where the person doesn't have to even be in tune; it just auto tunes it. They just have to. The singer just has to show up. They can sound like total crap, and the software fixes it. Or modern stuff where they deliberately distort the voice to make it sound robotic because it's a cool thing to do. The worst, some god awful pop that came on randomly on Tidal at one stage. Yeah, why do they deliberately distort voices? I want to hear what the singer's singing, not just It's weird. I don't know. It's like people don't want to hear the singer; they want to hear a distorted version of the singer. I don't know, but. The purest stuff would be I suppose David Chesky he places, if not just a dummy head, he would use, as far as I've seen, uses a dummy head, and maybe the singer has a microphone, and then he will do some balancing of, mixing and balancing of that. And he just has a new album coming that is out, which if you go onto Headfire, there's a discount code for, which is 3, I forgot what it's called. It's got a 3 in there. And they did the same recording of a bunch of jazz musicians, and they did it with 3 mics. So they did it with a stereo, a mic, a stereo pair, and a stereo mic. And there's 3 versions: one with just the stereo ribbon mic, one with a omni pair, and then one with both. And you can get to hear the difference between how the sound stage is with all 3. It's really interesting hearing it on headphones and speakers separately. But the thing is, between that, then you have mastering, and the sound could be passed through. God only knows what electronics. It could be just purely digital. They could pass it through various, the old school way was to pass it through various electronics that had various effects, ranging from, they might pass it through a tube, gear with a lot of tubes to make it sound mellow. They might pass it through compressors, which is the most common one. Who knows what they do to it? So all this, going back to what the artist intended, is mostly a load of BS, unless it's the artist is someone like Patricia Barber, who does a lot of stuff. I think does a lot of has very detailed control over what she does over the process, but the big artists and the big companies, they don't have any control over what happens. And the fun thing that came out was with MQAs. Claim that they go back to the original recording is absolute crap, because the mastering engineers have come out and said, we never got consulted on this. They haven't even come and used the original recordings. It's absolute bullcrap. But that's for another video. So, what's the best stuff? There's probably other stuff out there which is the best. I don't have a list, unfortunately. I should. So that's a good question. But you know, beware that when stuff is being recorded, between the recording and what you hear, the mastering, there could be a lot of stuff in between there, and you do lose a lot from that. Now, J.E. Cans asked, my favorite Odyssey LCD headphone. That's one I'm going to have to defer on because I haven't heard a lot of the stuff, but I did really like the LCD 4s. And I haven't heard the other variations since then, and I should. But I do like them, like someone was discussing, because comments on my Empyrean video, oh, but have you heard the LCD 4s? And I said, yes, I did, but not for a while. And I remember them through the King amp. They were just glorious in their own way. Imperfect, but glorious. And so that's, yeah, I had LCD-Xs were my main headphones for a while. I should get back into listening to those. Be interesting, but probably the ones that were nicest were the portable LCD i4. Am I thinking it right? I might get my model numbers mixed up. They were pretty amazing for portables, although I didn't have them here. Whenever I heard them, it's like, wow. And it's like, I thought actually it's interesting how they kind of give high-end IEMs a good run for their money. Novice Nick asked me, Amos, if you had... Live stream's still going fine. If you had a choice and... oh yes, Novice Nick said here about the best studio recordings, Blue Note and Mobile Fidelity, yes. And Sony, someone else, Kishore Patel, Sony Classical. Yep. Probably there are heaps that I've just forgotten about. I haven't actually thought about it. Anyway, Novice Nick was asking, if I had my choice and room setup wasn't a factor, which would you choose, digital or vinyl, and why? I'm lazy, I'd choose digital. That's the answer. I'm just lazy. I mean, if I had like a huge house and, I probably might have a vinyl collection, but it's just, I don't know. I mean, if I had enough money, it means I would have been working much harder than I do, which sounds terrible. Which is it's true. I would be working much harder than I do, or I would have got a profession like become a doctor and have a lot of money anyway. And then I probably just go with, I probably would have a vinyl setup, and I wouldn't use it often. I probably would have kept my dad's vinyl setup, which was an old Thorens turntable with SME tone arm. Just for sometimes, but I'm lazy. I just prefer sitting down and just clicking on stuff. Craig asks, this is connected to one of Albert's questions. If you haven't done so already, can you go over the websites you use and players you use for music other than streaming? If I want to build a library of high quality music but don't know where to begin. Okay. So he really only owns CDs. Other than streaming, yeah. If you can afford to buy a lot of music, there is a. I did start an article on HeadFi with a list of lossless music sites. That's probably the best. I should just check it. It's been updated. Anyone can update it, so it should be updated. But it's an article. There's a list of you just say lossless music sites. Search in Google for lossless music sites site : headfi.org, and it should show up. And that's probably the answer. But there are quite a few out there. So that's other than streaming. But the way I find stuff is through Radio Paradise and Rune and Tidal. So let's have a look at what you've all been talking about. Now, sorry I haven't been able to watch the chat. Wow, you've been talking a lot. Okay. Worms Driver, morning, asks, have you tried the Soundaware P1 on low impedance cans like Grados or Magnums? Yes, works fine. I mean, most of the headphones I have here are low impedance like Empyreans and Utopias. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably low impedance, normal sensitivity cans, it does really well. Novice Nick asks, any chance of getting your hands on Mytech products? Yes, I know you like your Mytech DAC. Yes, actually, I did almost meet the head of Mytech, but just when I saw him at the Tokyo show, he was doing a presentation, so I missed introducing myself to him. I'm kind of mixed on my tech because of MQA, but we'll get into that some other time. Maybe like it'd be interesting to review them, but I'm going to cycle back into high-end gear for reviewing and less portable. That's just because after a while you get to stop myself getting bored quickly. I change types of products I'm listening to. It's very hard to review stuff if you're bored, but not interested in it. Let's see, who else? What other questions have come up? If you had this is an interesting one. If you had a 1K budget, $1,000 budget, what would you grab? That is a tricky thing. The 1K budget, someone did that. The guy called Headphone Addict, who used to be big on Headfire, did that years ago. A 1K budget. Now, the question is desktop or portable? That's going to be tricky to answer. I'm not sure. It depends, desktop or portable. I'd have to spend some time thinking about that because the stuff it depends on the setup you want. Does it include transport? Can you use your phone if you include your phone included in that budget, or does it have to? Does music source have to be included in that budget? If not, then it's going to be different. But how much to spend on the headphones? How much to spend on the DAC amp? Yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. If you had to include headphones, that will make it tricky to keep it into 1K. I want to be able to go above 1K. Let's see what some complaints about the Lear 3 going on here. So, hello, I own the Focal Clear. Do you recommend rewiring them? And yes, with which cable? The Clear, actually, here's a funny thing. Nobody noticed this and they didn't announce it. It actually has a good quality LITS cable in there. So I just leave it as it is. And I found this out with the LX because they sent a Clear cable. And it was ridiculously long. And it was being so annoying. I said, stuff it, I'm just going to cut it in half and rewire it myself. And I stripped the wires and it's like, wait, they're blue. Oh my God, this is LITS wire. And it's like, they've used decent quality cable. And the story goes, that was told to me that Focal got wire from a well-known cable guy who was making aftermarket cables. And they basically, this guy does LITS wire. This sounds really good. Let's make our own LITS wire cable. Supposedly. Now, I don't have that verified, but that's apparently what a number of manufacturers have come to him and said, can we buy some of your cables? And he said, sure. Bought their cables and actually basically not copied, but were inspired by this guy's designs. But anyway, let's have a look through all the questions here. Some interesting thing about power. PMR controller for RGB lights can cause issues. Yeah, who knows? Like a lot of this household electronics aren't made with the consideration for audio gear at all. So, yes. A question about DACs need warm up. That's a little bit tricky. The Shit Audio Gear has a reputation for, it's the particular industrial DACs used. They need to stabilize, and to use ladder DACs. Okay, this is the thing about resistors. Atomic Bob posted this. He measured a resistor before and after it was warmed up, and it changes resistance. So that's why. Electronics actually do change how they work when they get warmer and colder. It's just basic physics. So amazing that people complain, jump online and go, blah, 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 this is crap, this is crap. It's like, no, it's actually there's genuine physics behind it. It not true in all cases. There are some designs out there designed to avoid that issue, such as the Hollow Spring Azure amp, which I reviewed, was designed not to have that issue. Of course, the THX gear is designed not to have that issue by cancelling out distortion. There we go. But no, it's totally real. There are measurements out there to prove it, but it's heat affects metal components. That's real. So So the comment about it being superstition and audio nonsense is not. It's physics. A lot of stuff that people call nonsense is actually based on physics, and the effect of heat in electronics is quite real. The effect of high frequency issues with high frequency noise through power lines and how it can be filtered out is quite real. How much it affects things is where it's tricky. It's not consistent. Different electronics will have, like the cord gear is designed to work and not have even high frequency noise, generate any high frequency noise. You'll see electronics for that, in the audio band and maybe just somewhat outside it, there have good performance. But then if you measure really high, up to the high frequencies, there's all this other distortion and hash coming through from maybe the electronics, such as, like if you have USB input, maybe let's say you have isolated USB input, but maybe because if you plug it into a hub where there's a lot of other devices, there's signaling going on, the processing of the USB data, the USB receiver chip may actually generate noise itself and put that into the electronics. So I think the new Shit Audio Unison USB seems to have isolated USB input, and then it processes it and then has isolation again, and then there's an output. So there's actually double isolation, so that you neither get noise from the computer source nor get noise from the processing of the USB through to a I2S signal for the DAC. So it's double isolated, and I think the really good custom setups are kind of like that. So that's stuff. Everything generates noise, and people were pissed off when Sony made a 64 gigabyte low noise micro SD card, and they thought, "What? Are you serious?" It's like, well, pulling the data off the card generates noise. Everything generates noise. I mean, the thing that DACs and this kind of stuff is amazing, because you have a digital section and analog section. It's got to be isolated. Either got to be isolated, and can you think of it like, especially like the M11 I have here? You have a screen. You have a screen that this electronics for all this stuff, all the Android stuff, generates noise, and Hi-Fi Man refused to use Android because all the noise it generates from the electronics. So I mean, they have all this Android processing, then they have to isolate that in this tiny gap from the rest of the electronics to get good sound quality coming through. It's a real issue. The Asgard 3. I'll get back to you on the Asgard 3. I haven't had a chance to really listen to that yet. Asgard 3 and Eon Flow. So once I get round to reviewing the Asgard 3, I'll try it with the Mr. Speaker's headphones. I'll try it with a lot of stuff to see how good it is. So what else? Other interesting questions have you got to down here? The way to get your best audio is to get your own power wires from the power plant. Interesting. What I'd like to do is actually like to get a Tesla power supply system and have it isolated off the grid. And I wonder if that generates less noise. I wonder if it generates a cleaner signal. Be interesting to know. Have your own nuclear reactor. In the future, when a nuclear reactor fits into a box, or like that teenage kid who tried to do nuclear experiments and caused some interesting reactions. What's my thought on the M-scaler and TT2? That would be my dream system. That's it. I should really, if I wasn't doing all this, none of this would be here. It would just be an M-scaler and TT2, or an M-scaler and Dave. That's all I'd have, and that'd be it. No, I'll talk about this one now because it's in one of my videos. A lot of it comes down to music quality, and for example, I've shot, I don't know if it'll be the final take, stuff about the Bifrost versus the Yggdrasil, and where you get advanced information on this. Let's say you have high quality recordings like I talked about earlier in the live stream. If you have high quality recordings, then there's a difference between an Yggdrasil and a Bifrost too. Those finer details that you have in the Yggdrasil, you don't quite get in the Bifrost too. But if I I picked a random thing that heard in the car, London Grammar, and I thought, in the car, what sounds great in the car doesn't sound so great when you put it in through a high-end system. And I was listening to it, and my system was like, that's not so good quality. And then I just thought, well, what happens if I switch between the Yggdrasil and the Bifrost to listening to London Grammar? And it's like, can't notice a difference. So that's it. And what sticks in my head is a comment someone made is when there was one of the Headfi meets, and someone had a top of the line headphone system. It was an eddy current amp, and I think Yggdrasil or something like that. They have the standard kind of flavor of the month top of the line system, and top of the line headphones. I don't recall what. And someone came up, and said, "Oh, can I have a listen?" And sure, put on headphones. Maybe it was HD800s, I think, could have been, and then looked through his music list, and all the music he was listening to was crap. And it's like, why? And he didn't say it, but it's like, why spend 10 grand on a system that you're going to play crap music through? And that's a point I should make more often, is that if you listen to regular pop and rock, don't buy an expensive system. It's just not worth the money. But if you want to get the experience of listening to very good recordings and the pick up the subtleties that bring out the real feeling of how how good the artist was, then that's what you buy the expensive gear for. And it's like, I didn't like jazz music until I had heard it through a really good system. If I look back through my old playlists from 10, 11, 12 years ago, they were all just regular pop rock. And I have screenshots of them, actually. I don't have the actual lists, but I have most of my playlists going back most of that way. And the transition into jazz and back into classical. My father listened to classical, so I was exposed to it. Well, there's a big increase in that direction. I spent a lot of time listening to jazz, and still do. So, gear quality is a big factor there. Music quality is a huge factor in what's worth listening to. Interesting story. A friend of mine was at one of the Chesky recordings. Was it Amber Rubath? I think it was Amber Rubath, and he said, everyone's got to remain dead silent, of course. And so at the end, let's say he through that, the emotion coming from the singer was incredible. He had tears streaming out his nose. His nose was running. He couldn't do anything. He just had to sit there, and he was like so embarrassed because his whole face was all covered in tears and his nose dribbling everywhere. I'm totally serious. And he's like, at the end, he's like, "Oh my God, I must look terrible." So the recording stops, cut, everything at the end, and he's like, "Oh my God," and he looks at everyone else and he thinks, "Oh, I'm going to be so embarrassed." And look, everyone else sitting there was like the same. There's just, it was the same for everyone. The feeling, you don't get that unless you're in front of the live singer. And the Dave was the one that came closest to that. The Dave, brought out that feeling in you. It's like like when you're in front of a live singer and you're listening to a live singer, it's that feeling. That feeling doesn't come through through the electronics. It's like something is missed. And there was a Stereophile did a thing. They got the top of the line esoteric digital system, and they had a guy play the piano. And then I think it was either the same, they either recorded him on the spot and played it back through the esoteric system, or he was playing stuff he'd already recorded. And they said there was like, they could hear all the detail, but something was missing. And the Dave was the first deck I had, which didn't have that missing. You could feel it. You could actually feel the music, and I thought, that's incredible. But that was my experience. So that's what I'd have as my end game system. I never give short answers. So let's see. I'm going to go on for a little bit more than I'm going to call it a day. What do I think of blind testing? Okay. I think it's a valuable thing to know one's limits. And it's a valuable thing to test one's limits. But also, blind testing, like if I'm under test conditions, I will perform worse than if I'm not. And so if I blind tested myself and it was a deliberate blind test, let's say, I was talking about the Bifrost and Yggdrasil, I would be so busy self-doubting myself, I'd probably make mistakes. So I'd be like, did I really hear that? Or didn't I? I think if I very careful. I think I could rig a blind test that even if it was completely blind, if I chose the exact setup, like the setup I already had here, I chose things where I know absolutely I will hear those differences without having to worry about which. It's so clear. Um, so if I think, uh, let's say I know that, let's say I found a particular piece of music where I could clearly hear, where I knew unmistakably which deck I was listening to because at those particular notes or that particular moment in the music, there was something distinct I could make out. Um, then I think I could set up a blind test where I would pass it. But I think if someone goes, oh, we're going to do a blind test here, you're in a room you're unfamiliar with gear you're unfamiliar with, or maybe the setup you're unfamiliar and the music you're unfamiliar, then you're more likely to fail. And because a failure doesn't indicate that there isn't a difference, it indicates there's only that you failed passing the test. I think the human factor has to be accounted for in any kind of test. But some interesting stories on blind tests. There are multiple inputs in a lot of the gear I have, and I've often plugged stuff in, and it's been a few days has passed, and I've forgotten what I plugged into what, and I've actually thought I plugged, this into input one and this into input two. This happened with the Kitsune actually. I thought I plugged the Yggdrasil into input one and the Kitsune into input two. It was actually reversed. And so I had my notes down. It's like, this is not, and I looked and I thought, I made my notes about the differences, and it turned out it was the opposite. Which deck I was listening to was opposite. So I have had moments where I don't know what I was listening to, and that was interesting because it affected a blind test on me, and it was like, oh, that was surprising. But I don't look at it as like, the kind of very militant way some people do. I just find it interesting to know, like, if I hear a very subtle difference, I'll think this is kind of hitting the limit of where I trust myself from experience. So I'm kind of very pragmatic about it. That's my opinion on blind testing, is that I don't look at it as, I don't like the extreme arguments. Don't make sense to me. It's like I need to know my limits so I can give a reasonable explanation of what I'm hearing. And also, this is where I talk about music too. It's like, well, I really focused on this particular quality piece of music with the best gear I have here to notice these really tiny subtle differences, but you won't notice those. This is just like, I wanted to find the limits. For most music, it doesn't matter. And so that's my approach kind of overall to this kind of thing. Okay, where are we? Which music albums would you recommend to enjoy good quality gear? Depends on your genres you like. My favorites were always the Chesky binaural stuff and things like Friday Night in San Francisco, the three guitars. Patricia Barber has a new album, Higher, which is out, which is really interesting. If you like Patricia Barber, I just explore the lossless stuff, which the link again, go search for lossless audio sites at headfi.org, site headfi.org in Google, and there's a article there which I originally constructed and other people updated. I've got to get a Dave now. I've been like that. It's like once you've listened to Dave, it's like, oh god, I can't let this. Is just ruins everything else. So anyway, so a list of high quality albums that would take a while. I'd have to actually make a list of stuff I have. I can't just think of it straight off the top of my head. I have to go through and find stuff. But yeah, it's very genre dependent. Like if you like modern, here's the thing that really annoyed me. I'll tell you what. Here's this. Go onto YouTube and look at the NPR Tiny Desk concerts. I know this is not lossless stuff, but they are way better than. I was watching. I think I said this already maybe in a review. Anderson .Paak. Okay, here's a guy who makes music that is totally not my thing. 100% not my thing. I think it's the most viewed NPR Tiny Desk concert ever. Was the Anderson .Paak one. And I watched that and I thought, this guy is freaking amazing. So I go into Roon and listen to his album. It's like the album quality is so rubbish. It is so bad. But if you watch any of his performances on Saturday Night Live or somewhere like, I think it was Saturday Night Live, not Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show or something like that. His performances are like, maybe it was Saturday Night Live. It was, holy cow, this guy is just freaking amazing. But his albums like are just recorded with such terrible quality. It's like, oh god, I couldn't listen to his albums. It's just like, this is rubbish. But he's one guy who should do a live album. do what Sonny Roth did and just just to have a concert, record the concert and say, this is the album. That would be like 10 times better. So I honestly say, go and watch. There are heaps of them. There must be hundreds of them now. Go and watch the NPR Tiny Desk concerts, and there's just 15 minutes of just brilliance and stuff that you'd never encountered before, and artists which I kind of only maybe any vaguely heard of, or maybe even not heard of, and it's like, wow, some of this stuff you pick up, the unexpected stuff you come across, and it stops matter. The recording quality is so good it stops mattering that it's lossless. That's what I listen to when I'm kind of bored and I don't know what to listen to. I'll just cruise through Tiny Desk concerts till I find something I like. So that's my recommendation. Yeah, kind of really odd recommendation, but I reckon they're some of the best performances I've seen online anywhere. But yeah, like a good quality live stuff. Not just like big concert stuff, but I've seen Patricia Barber, her stuff live, but the quality of the videos is really terrible. Really, I wish they just made really good. KEXP, there we go. KEXP is another one who does really good live concerts in Seattle. That's another channel to watch. If there are any other channels actually who do really good live stuff, let me know as well, because I'm keen to check that stuff out. Yeah, so NPR Tiny Desk and KEXP, their live stuff is actually I'd recommend more than looking for certain downloaded music actually. So another one for music discovery, I've always had Radio Paradise. They are streaming, but they do lossless streaming now. You can actually offline make a cache of lossless music on your phone, and they're very eclectic. So it's kind of can be very random and sometimes very eclectic, but it very rarely delves into classical. It very, very occasionally delves into stuff that's very, very old, like back into the 30s, 1930s, but otherwise it's kind of good for the kind of discovery of stuff that you haven't encountered before, I reckon anyway. So some recommendations from people. Mayo Nakano on piano on YouTube. I'll check that out. Some of the oh yes, what are you listening to right now? Thread on Headfi. I was listening to a couple of those America's Got Talent singers. The one who did Janis Joplin, that girl who's just like the shyest person on earth until she starts singing, then she just is like a different person. What was her name? I've forgotten. She has her own YouTube channel with some really good stuff too. The other famous girl when she was 6, I can't remember her name, who's British. Both are British actually. Has her own YouTube channel with some really good singing. It also helps that they're both gorgeous. But being a bit of a comment there, but some singers who have their own channels also have some really nice recordings because it's just direct. It's kind of that's nicer because you get to hear their voice pretty clearly. The occasional other band that became famous either through America's Got Talent or other shows have their own channels too. They can be really good. And I think that's the great thing. You don't have to go through, album mastering, all that kind of crap, and you end up with that Anderson .Paak situation where his albums sound terrible, but his live performances sound amazing, especially if they just post directly on YouTube. Last questions, and I'm going to go and have breakfast in a bit because my family will probably wake up. Will you be reviewing Hybe R5? Probably not. Hybe didn't like me much I don't think. So I said that the Hybe R6 shouldn't have a 10 ohm output impedance. It could be detrimental to their ability to sell them. Probably it hasn't been. And I guess if you're on their kind of proverbial shit list, they don't like you. So I've asked to review stuff before, like the R3, and they've just kind of ignored me. So I don't know. So unless some manufacturers are happy to send me stuff like FIO, others are like not going to unless I buy it. It varies. So it's like whatever. I don't have anything against. It's the manufacturer's choice. But I probably won't be doing. I'll be doing more high-end stuff and less portable and towards the end of the year. And then there'll be the November show, and then it'll be a whole cycle again. So it'll be getting into stacks and maybe other high-end amps and high-end DACs and high-end headphones. And what's coming up? This arrived yesterday. I haven't unboxed it yet. I'll be doing that today. The Rye Penta turned up, which will be interesting. So, what else is coming up? Bifrost 2. There will be Asgard 3, which you can't see. What else have I got coming up? Where did I put it? Oh, it's hiding behind me because I took it off the rack. The Massdrop THX 789. When I get around to doing it, because I want to be very careful about how I do it, an MQA video, and some interesting things. They were in one of the videos. I still have the M5 to do, which is hanging off a set of AME custom. These are interesting because they have the tweeter is actually well, it's not. They say it's an electrostatic tweeter. It's actually electric tweeter. There's a tiny transformer in there, and it's got really nice treble. Really not IM treble, but really good treble. So they're really nice. They'll come up too in the end of my kind of review through portable stuff, and there's some other. Simgot, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, a Korean company, sent some IMs, they'll be reviewed too. And I can't think what else, too early in the morning to think, so that'll be coming up. So, will I be reviewing the new Odyssey LCD i3 planers? I should ask them. I keep forgetting to talk to Odyssey. I went to their factory and years ago and talk to them, and I should get round to organising that stuff. I'd like to, so it's a matter of, that's what else is coming. Mr. Speaker's Ether 2, yes, very overdue review. I'll probably be going to try and do a high-end planar comparison, if possible. It probably will be. What else was coming through? Eventually, a Headamp GSX Mini. Eventually, because Headamp is as about reliable and getting organising this stuff as I am in saying that I'll make a video of it. And so eventually it will happen. But you know, Justin does stuff in batches, so it's kind of hard. And he's a perfectionist. So what else was coming up in the high end? I've gone blank. I can't remember. I've got like a list somewhere. Let's see if I can find my list. There's stuff that's going to and stuff that I'd like to. I'm going to see if I can do the Rossen Audio headphones. Stax is already on the list. I've already got that set up. Focal might be a bit tricky, but still doable. Maybe more Hi-Fi Man headphones, probably. Possibly I could do more JH Audio stuff. But I'm not sure if when I get back into doing high-end IEMs again, I'm going to maybe try and see if I can do more Fostex stuff, because I just did their Fostex Bluetooth, and I want to do the 909s actually. That'd be interesting. I'd like to do the Monoprice Cavalli stuff that's just come out, the new Liquid Gold. That might be possible, and the Liquid Platinum. Yeah, I'd like to do those. I remember hearing the originals of the Liquid Platinum. I think it was a Liquid Platinum. Unbelievably amazing amp. I mean, if the ones with the huge rectifier tubes, amazing. But I wonder how much of that kind of amazingness they've captured into the Monoprice ones. It would be interesting. I probably won't be doing a lot of IMs for the rest of the year. I'm just getting kind of tired of them. But the Bifrost 2 will probably be fast. The Bifrost 2 was pretty easy to nail down, so it'll be sooner rather than later. I just seen John ask, did I answer your question earlier? I'm not sure what your question earlier was. I'd have to go and check. RC asks, another question. RC asks, boxes or briefs? Boxes for me, except when doing Aikido, because then, Massdrop introduced me to the Sax, the Sax underwear, which was very handy, because you don't want stuff rolling around when it doesn't need to roll, when you're rolling around. boring high-end stuff, knowledge zenith, no, sorry. Anything down there, no. I probably, the thing is, you go onto YouTube, okay, I'll be honest, Linsol contacted me and said, can you review stuff? And I said, oh, possibly. Actually, I just posted a review of one of the things you sell. And it's like, you go onto YouTube, you get contacted by a Chinese company, and they say, can you review my IEMs? It's like, what are they? Have a look. It's like, they're $50 IEMs, and you go on there are 20, 30 people who have just reviewed them. And it's like, what can I contribute? And I don't want to do stuff that's I don't want to just do stuff that everyone else is doing. I want to do stuff that other people are not doing, or do stuff from a different perspective, or do stuff that interests me. And for example, $50 IEMs, for the most part, do not interest me. Even $100 IEMs is kind of pushing it. I want stuff that is, for example, when people IEM manufacturers contact me, it's like, well, do you have anything unique to show me? And it's like, we have an electrostatic tweeter in our IEMs. It's like, I want to check that out. That is really interesting. But other people are like, will you check out my IEMs? It's like, well, no, everyone's sticking, balanced armatures and dynamic drivers in IEMs. I don't really care what's unique. And it's like, we have switches on the side. Okay, I'll check that out. That's one I'll try. Or they have some, something interesting. For the most part, I just go to the Tokyo shows, and it's like, everyone's like, will you check out my IEMs? It's like, okay, I'll have a listen. It's like, okay, well, that's all right, or that's good, or it's like, there's nothing, it's all much the same thing with very slight differences. Unless someone says, these are really amazing, there's something unique about them. And the last company that did that was QDC. They didn't even ask me. Actually, someone else told me I should listen to the QDC stuff. And but they use some serious technology to make their IEMs, apparently, like serious research. The obviously Shaw it's on the list, and I haven't got around to mentioning Shaw KSE 1200. I'll get in for a review. If it's not unique and interesting in the IEM world, I just can't be bothered for the most part, with exception in that if the company is someone I know, and they're doing something interesting, like I know Campbell from Campfire, obviously. I know John from Noble, even though I've never actually reviewed any of his stuff. Usually I'll at least try it out, and I go, well, if I think this actually sounds really good and is worth a review, I'll do it. If it kind of sounds average, I'll say, I wish this is a bit bright for me, or a bit this too much this way. If I think it's worth talking about, I'll talk about it. If it interests me, I'll talk about it. Other than that, it kind of gets, a lot of the IM world just gets incredibly boring for me. It'll be like going onto eBay and reviewing every single, cheap DAC amp out there, or every single cheap tube amp out there. It's kind of the same level of boring. It's like, not interesting. Yeah, I'd like to. I've got the card of the QDC guy, but it's probably like everyone else has been asking him, can I review an Anole VX. It was an amazing sounding IEM, that's for sure. Didn't realize the ship Magni was that small. They are pretty tiny. It's a nice comparison. I should do a comparison thing. They are very tiny. That's why they've got external wall warts. Anyway, it's hit 7 a.m, so I'm going to head off. Thanks for joining me. What I will do, actually, quickly, give me 1 second, which I forgot to do. This is hold on, where have I gone back to? This is valid for 1 day if you want to join in. This link I put in the you can join the Discord. It will work for 1 day, so if anyone watching this video like days later, they won't see it. So every live stream, I invite a couple of new people to the Discord. Thanks for joining me for the live stream. Don't forget this, my work is supported by people. If you do end up going to be spending, especially thousands on gear, and you want advice, consider helping support me for even a couple of bucks a month, and that makes a huge difference. If even a fraction of the people watching my videos support me, it makes it possible to do these reviews, and it pays for the electricity. It really does pay for the electricity bills. No joke there. So those people I forgot to draw anything this month. My apologies. I'll do that later. I'll do a separate one for the draw. But I do, like, I have audio gear I don't need, or it's maybe the old stuff I just give away. If you need my advice, because people like to ask questions, they can ask me questions anytime. And if I have behind the scenes stuff to post, or first takes, or you want to see my review stuff early, you can see that early before I post it live on YouTube. So thanks once again for watching, and those of you who want to join, I'll see you on the Discord. Then we have to find the OBS and find how to do the transition and blah 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 blah.